Hidden deep in the Rocky Mountains lies a place the federal government has called a living graveyard for the most dangerous individuals in America. It is the Supermax prison ADX Florence, where men are locked down 23 hours a day in concrete cells with no sunlight, no gangs, and nothing left but permanent isolation. In this video, we count down 8 of the most dangerous gang leaders, men the federal government has said will never walk free again. From the Italian Mafia, Nuestra Familia, to the Mexican Mafia and Dead Man Incorporated. All of them confined inside what has been called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. So, who do you think is the most feared name on this list? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let us open the steel doors and step inside the place known as ADX. Number 8. Pedro Gutierrez, Nine Trey Gangsters. Charlotte, summer of 2011. Inside the prison corridors of North Carolina, a short command was given. All-out war. Just 2 words, and 5 different facilities erupted in violence. For 6 months, the entire system was under lockdown, and the shockwaves even spilled into the streets. Behind it all was Pedro Gutierrez, known as Magoo. The FBI identified him as a senior leader of the United Blood Nation and the Nine Trey set. Gutierrez grew up in the Bronx, where the Bloods had already taken root. He began as a street-level member, climbed the ranks, and eventually claimed the chairmanship of UBN, the highest seat on the governing council. One FBI agent said, "No one was above him. He controlled the top structure of the organization." From a prison cell, he could still move thousands of followers outside with a single order. What frightened officials most was how he maintained power. Even while serving time with the New York Department of Corrections, he collected gang dues, issued rules, and directed money through intermediaries in North Carolina. Funds were tied to tax fraud and identity theft schemes. Every note, every coded phrase could carry an order. And the Nine Trey set, the most violent wing of the Bloods, was the flag he raised highest. His conflict with a rival known as Pretty Tony became a turning point. Gutierrez ordered an attack, and fights spread through the units. Inmates clashed, officers rushed in to regain control, and retaliation surfaced in the community as well. State officials had no choice but to enforce a complete lockdown. For 6 months, 5 prisons stayed sealed, a reminder of how dangerous one gang leader could be, even behind bars. But no one outruns the law forever. In 2017, a federal jury indicted nearly 80 members of UBN, with Gutierrez named as a central figure. The trial in Charlotte was so tense that jurors had to remain anonymous. Prosecutors described him as a man running the entire empire from inside prison. The outcome? 20 years in federal prison to run consecutively after his state sentence. Judge Frank Whitney, as he delivered the sentence, said, "I wish I could give longer." He recommended that Gutierrez be confined at ADX Florence, America's Supermax, where every sound is buried beneath layers of steel and concrete. Today, his name appears on the list of ADX inmates, with a projected release date of October 16, 2034. Inside a cell barely 6 by 9 feet, he sits alone 23 hours each day. The steel door opens only when 4 officers escort him. The sky appears only through a narrow slit. An empire that once reached 7,000, even 15,000 members, is now reduced to silence inside one concrete box. For the law, this was justice. For the communities that endured the violence of UBN, it was a reminder that no leader is untouchable. And for Pedro Gutierrez, the name Magoo, once feared across yards and street corners, now exists only in the records of the Supermax. And if Gutierrez represents the corporate style of power, running an empire from a box of concrete, the next figure shows another path. A cold assassin tied to the Genovese family who turned contract killings into a profession. Number 7. Fotios, Freddy, Geas, Genovese hitter. Hazleton, West Virginia, late October 2018. Just hours after James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston boss, was transferred into the prison, he was attacked inside his cell and did not survive. Among the prime suspects, one name stood out. Fotios Freddy Geas, the Springfield enforcer once tied to the Genovese family. He neither admitted nor denied involvement, but those who knew him all said the same. Freddy despised informants. Born in 1967 in Springfield, Massachusetts, Freddy could never become a made man because he lacked direct Italian bloodlines, but that did not stop him from serving as a trusted hitter for the Springfield crew. Alongside his younger brother Ty, Freddy entered the underworld with cold efficiency and strict discipline, bound by loyalty to Omerta, the code of silence. When Arthur Nigro, the acting boss of the Genovese family, needed a job done, the Geas brothers were always available. On November 23, 2003, Adolfo Big Al Bruno, a high-ranking Genovese representative in Springfield, was shot down on the street. Freddy and Ty did not pull the trigger, but they planned the hit. They recruited shooter Frankie Roche and organized every step. Not long after, Gary Westerman, suspected of cooperating with law enforcement, disappeared. Investigators later concluded that the Geas crew was responsible. 2 violent messages in a row, both carrying the same warning. Those labeled as traitors would not survive. The FBI spent nearly 8 years tightening the net. In April 2011, a federal jury in Manhattan convicted Arthur Nigro, Freddy, and Ty Geas on multiple charges linked to organized crime, including the Bruno and Westerman cases. In September of that year, Freddy was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. The press called him the Springfield hitman for the Genovese, a man without official rank, but feared all the same. It might have ended there, but fate added another chapter. In October 2018, Whitey Bulger, once an FBI informant, was transferred to USP Hazleton. Within hours, he was found deceased. In 2022, a federal grand jury indicted Freddy and 2 associates. 2 years later, in September 2024, inside a West Virginia courtroom, Freddy admitted to voluntary manslaughter and assault resulting in serious injury. The judge imposed an additional 25 years. For a man already serving life, the new sentence only locked the door tighter. Today, the name Freddy Geas sits on the inmate roster at ADX Florence, Colorado, is the Supermax, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In a concrete cell just 6 by 9 feet, he spends 23 hours a day in silence. The low hum of ventilation fans, the heavy slam of electronic locks each time the steel door closes, the echoes of Springfield, the memories of contract killings, and the shadow of Bulger, all buried within 4 white walls. Freddy's story is a paradox. He was never a boss, never a high-ranking figure, yet he carved his legacy from a single creed: hatred of informants. From Bruno to Westerman to Bulger, every milestone tied back to the same shadow of betrayal. But in the end, even the coldest assassin is left only with solitude inside the Supermax. For the public, it is a reminder. The Mafia's code of silence may be brutal, but the federal courts deliver the final sentence. And if Freddy Geas stands as the image of a man who killed for his hatred of informants, the next figure shows another path. A Nuestra Familia leader who turned prison discipline itself into an invisible weapon. Number 6. Cornelio Jesús Tristan, Nuestra Familia. Pelican Bay, California, in the early 2000s. Inside the security housing unit, the concrete walls seemed to cut off every line of contact with the outside world. Yet from that darkness, Cornelio Jesús Tristan and a handful of other leaders still ordered killings, managed drug trafficking, and kept the Nuestra Familia machine running with precision. They were known by a chilling title: the Generals. Tristan grew up in Central California, in a region where Norteños pledged their loyalty to the Red of the Norte gang. He joined Nuestra Familia at a young age and slowly rose into command. Without shouting, without public displays, he controlled through scribbled notes, coded words, and smuggled phone calls. To his peers, Tristan was one of the undeniable voices on the Council of 5 Generals. In April 2001, Operation Black Widow began. The FBI and federal prosecutors followed letters, commissary transfers, and names hidden inside prison intelligence reports. They uncovered a disturbing reality. Even in solitary confinement, the Nuestra Familia leadership, including Tristan, was accused of organizing, collecting funds, and sending out violent orders against anyone who betrayed the group. 3 years later, in September 2004, 8 senior members of NF, including Tristan, stood before a federal court and entered guilty pleas under the RICO statute. Each admitted to at least 2 homicides as part of their plea deal. The press labeled them with 2 words: top generals. By September 2005, the sentences were handed down. Cornelio Tristan, along with James Morado, Joseph Pinky Hernandez, Gerald Rubalcaba, and Tex Marine Hernandez, received federal life sentences. One shocking detail emerged. The state of California, under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, had reduced their state prison terms to allow the federal court to impose harsher punishment and immediately transfer them into federal custody. Soon after, the group became known as the Colorado Five. They were sent to ADX Florence, the Supermax prison designed to sever all chains of command. Their removal from Pelican Bay left a massive power vacuum. Inside Nuestra Familia, subordinates scrambled to rewrite the group's constitution and restructure the organization to survive. Yet loyal members still whispered about the general's exile to Colorado. Tristan, locked within the white walls of ADX, was believed by some to still influence the outside. Whether true or not, the image of his shadow haunted the norteños still roaming the streets. Today, federal records confirm Cornelio Jesús Tristan, serving life at ADX Florence. In a concrete cell 6 by 9 feet, he spends 23 hours a day in silence. A small slot opens only to pass a food tray. The sound of locks, the endless drone of ventilation, those are the only reminders of life. Once a man who commanded hundreds, he is now just another solitary inmate trapped in the Rockies. The story of Tristan reflects the harsh reality of Nuestra Familia, an organization with its own constitution, its own generals, its iron discipline. But in the end, every leader must face the weight of federal law. Life sentences, concrete walls, and silence. That is the final chapter. Number 5. Joseph Pinky Hernandez, Nuestra Familia, San Jose, California, in the late 1990s. In alleys painted with red graffiti, every norteño youth knew they were paying taxes to something larger. That something was Nuestra Familia, a violent organization run like a military. And inside the SHU at Pelican Bay, behind concrete walls, one of its most powerful generals was writing orders. His name was Joseph Pinky Hernandez. Hernandez was no outsider. He was one of the 5 highest-ranking leaders, the top generals of NF. From solitary confinement, he directed regiments on the streets. Norteño groups spread across California. Letters and coded symbols carried his violent instructions. Every commissary transfer, every Western Union payment flowed back to the generals. To his followers, Pinky was a final voice of life or death. But in 2001, everything shifted. Operation Black Widow was launched. The FBI and federal prosecutors tracked every move, every coded note, every dollar sent through prison accounts. They uncovered a chilling picture. Even locked inside the SHU, generals like Hernandez were accused of running drug operations, collecting money, and giving orders as if no barriers existed. By September 2004, the hammer fell. 8 senior members of NF, including Pinky, stood before a federal court. All entered guilty pleas under RICO, admitting responsibility for at least 2 homicides each. The press described them with one word: generals. In September 2005, the sentences came down: life in federal prison. But there was one unusual twist. The state of California, under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, reduced their state sentences to make room for the federal system, allowing harsher punishments. A rare move showing just how dangerous these leaders were considered. Soon after, Hernandez and 4 other top figures were transferred directly to ADX Florence, Colorado, the notorious Supermax where all lines of command are cut off. But the shadow of Pinky did not vanish. In May 2006, his wife, Carolyn Huerta, was documented visiting ADX Florence. She allegedly carried a coded message back to a regiment in Salinas. That same day, a Western Union transfer of $300 was sent to her in Colorado. For the FBI, this was proof that even from the nation's most secure prison, Hernandez was still trying to issue orders. Details like these turned him into the symbol of a haunting question. Can any prison truly sever gang power? Today, federal records list him as Joseph Pinky Hernandez, serving life at ADX Florence. In a concrete cell 6 by 9 feet, he spends 23 hours a day in silence. A narrow slot opens to deliver food. Every phone call, every letter, is under strict surveillance. No more norteños, no more regiments. Just 4 white walls and a solitary figure waiting out a life without end. For the community, his name remains a reminder. Nuestra Familia once ran like an underground state, with its own constitution, its own generals, its taxes, and its discipline. Joseph Pinky Hernandez was one of its greatest symbols, a man who turned prison into a command post, and who was finally buried inside what they call the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Number 4. Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba, Nuestra Familia, Pelican Bay, California, in the early 2000s. Inside the SHU, the state's highest security isolation unit, where sunlight filtered through only a narrow slit, a small group of inmates continued to run an empire on the outside. They were the generals of Nuestra Familia, and among them, one name drew special attention from the FBI: Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba. Rubalcaba was no outsider. He was one of the highest-ranking leaders of NF, standing shoulder to shoulder with Cornelio Tristan, Joseph Pinky Hernandez, James Morado, and Tex Marin Hernandez. From a concrete cell inside Pelican Bay, he still commanded hundreds of norteños on the streets. A scribbled note, a coded symbol, a message passed through a lawyer, any of these could trigger violent enforcement under gang discipline. In 2001, Operation Black Widow officially began. The FBI and federal prosecutors launched a years-long investigation, tracking prison notes, commissary accounts, and unsolved homicides no one dared to report. The results revealed a chilling truth. Even inside the SHU, supposedly cut off from all contact, NF generals like Rubalcaba were accused of running the organization smoothly, trafficking drugs, and punishing betrayal. By September 2004, Rubalcaba and 7 other defendants stood in federal court. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty under RICO, admitting responsibility for at least 2 homicides carried out under NF. It was a decisive blow, the first time the highest leadership of Nuestra Familia had been pulled fully into the spotlight of federal law. 1 year later, in September 2005, Rubalcaba was sentenced to life in federal prison. Soon after, Rubalcaba and 4 others were transferred directly to ADX Florence, Colorado, the nation's most notorious Supermax. There, all chains of command were cut off. No more letters leaking out. No more secret Western Union payments flowing to regiments. Only a 6 by 9 foot cell, a fluorescent light that never shut off, and 23 silent hours each day. A number replaced a name once feared within Nuestra Familia. The disappearance of Rubalcaba and the Colorado Five left a vast power vacuum. NF leaders rewrote their constitution and reorganized the structure to maintain money and discipline. Yet for many norteños on the streets, the name Cuete lingered like a ghost, a reminder that the violence of that era still echoed, even though he was sealed away in ADX. Today, Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba remains behind the heavy steel doors of ADX Florence. No soldiers, no regiments, no power. Only a solitary inmate, a life bound to Nuestra Familia, ending in a sentence with no return. Number 3. Jeff Fort, Black Pea Stones. Chicago in the late 1960s. On the poverty-stricken streets of the South Side, a skinny teenager named Jeff Fort and his friends formed a small street group. Within just a few years, it grew into a powerful gang. In 1968, Fort appeared before a U.S. Senate committee. For the first time, the nation saw the face of a young leader who used smooth words to mask the violence beneath. Released from prison in 1976 after serving time for misusing federal funds, Fort returned to Chicago with a new plan. He cloaked his gang under the guise of religion, joining the Moorish Science Temple and renaming the Black Pea Stones into El Rukn, which means the pillar. The group maintained a strict hierarchy, discipline, and organized criminal operations, while outwardly presenting itself as a religious community. Their headquarters, an abandoned theater at Drexel and 39th Street, became known as the Fort, a gathering place and command center. By the early 1980s, under Fort's control, El Rukn was no longer just a street gang. It functioned as a structured criminal network, complete with ranks, generals, and its own code of discipline. But federal authorities were closing in. In 1983, Fort was convicted on drug charges and sent back to prison. Yet even behind bars, he continued to issue daily orders, running the group as if walls did not exist. Then, in 1986, an unprecedented case surfaced. Evidence showed Fort and his men had contacted representatives of Libya, arranging a deal for $2.5 million in exchange for carrying out terrorist acts inside the United States. Wiretaps and thousands of hours of recordings documented his coded language and plans. By late 1987, Fort stood in federal court. Judge Charles Norgal, sentencing him to 80 years, declared, "You are clearly the leader of this organization." The press called it one of the first terrorism-related convictions in America. The storm did not end there. In 1988, Fort was again convicted, this time for ordering the murder of a rival gang member back in 1981. That brought an additional 75 years. Combined, the sentences buried him under more than 150 years behind bars. El Rukn soon unraveled under waves of federal prosecutions. Some convictions of his associates were later overturned due to prosecutorial misconduct. But Fort's fate never changed. Even after adopting the name Abdul Malik Kaaba when he converted to Islam, his destiny remained fixed. From street gang boss, he became one of the most infamous inmates in the federal system. Today, Jeff Fort is housed at ADX Florence in Colorado, the Supermax prison where the government buries those it deems most dangerous. Inside a 6 by 9 foot cell, under fluorescent lights that never turn off, Fort spends 23 hours a day in silence. His only hour outside is in a small concrete yard, the sky divided by layers of razor wire. The story of Jeff Fort stands as a paradox. From a small group of forgotten teenagers, he built an empire. He wrapped it in religion, even reached out to foreign governments. Yet the path still led to Supermax, where there is no power, no fort, no chance on the south side. Only an aging prisoner, sitting quietly among the rocks of Colorado. Number 2. Perry Roark, Dead Man Incorporated, Baltimore, in the early 2000s. Inside the yards of the Maryland Department of Corrections, scraps of paper passed hand to hand and whispered conversations gave birth to a new organization. Its name was Dead Man Incorporated, or DMI. And the man at the very top, known by many nicknames, Rock, Pops, Slim, or Saho the Ghost, was Perry Roark. At first, DMY acted as an extension of the Black Gorilla family. Roark, along with co-founders James Sweeney and Brian Jordan, built a strict chain of command. Members called each other by military ranks, dividing into units across different prisons. Each unit had a commander, lieutenants, and financial officers. In the beginning, DMY mainly served the BGF, striking rivals and clearing the way inside the prison yards. But soon, ambition spread beyond the walls. DMI moved into drug trafficking, extortion, and even drew women on the outside into its network. For over a decade, Roark was the supreme commander. From a narrow cell, he allegedly issued orders through smuggled phones, contraband passed by visitors, and coded instructions. He directed assaults and targeted those considered traitors. In 2009, one name appeared on his list: Tony Geiger. According to federal prosecutors, Roark gave the order for his killing from behind bars. By February 2011, the walls closed in. A sweeping RICO case charged 22 DMY members. At the very top of the indictment stood Roark, described as the supreme leader of the entire organization. A year later, he entered a guilty plea. Court records revealed the machinery in detail, from smuggled prison calls to street-level units, all feeding back to the frail man his followers called Pops. On July 1, 2013, inside a federal courtroom in Baltimore, Roark heard his final sentence: life in prison. Prosecutor Rod Rosenstein stated plainly so Roark would have been released from state prison. But instead, he will spend the rest of his life in federal custody for leading DMY in Jessie and arranging murders. Those words cut off his last hope of freedom, which had been only months away. Judge Richard D. Bennett recommended Roark be sent to Florence, Colorado, the most notorious prison complex in America. For a man accustomed to running an empire through cracks in the system, this was a sentence that stripped not only freedom, but also his voice. In Florence, every communication is cut. No contraband phones, no Western Union transfers, no street units bowing to orders. In court, Roark claimed he had renounced DMY. But for federal authorities, those words meant nothing. The network he helped lead fractured in his absence, splitting into factions. Some sought to maintain ties with the BGF, while others veered toward white supremacist ideology. Even behind bars, his shadow continued to haunt. Today, Perry Roark lives inside the Supermax, a 6 by 9 foot cell, 23 silent hours each day. One remaining hour in a narrow concrete yard, the sky cut into fragments by razor wire. From a man once on the verge of release, he became part of the group subjected to the harshest confinement in the federal system. His story is a paradox. The man once called Pops, the elder guiding younger soldiers, now grows old in the silence of ADX. No more power, no more commands. Only cold silence, where endless days stretch on without end. Number 1. Jessie Chino, Mexican Mafia. February of 2013, at USP Canaan in Pennsylvania. It began like any other gray morning. Heavy steel doors echoed down the corridors. But within minutes, a federal corrections officer was down, and alarms blared across the entire prison. The name spread quickly through the compound. Jessie Conway, known as Chino. Born in 1977 in the Philippines, Conway and his family immigrated to New York. His childhood in Rome, New York, was marked by poverty and gangs. While other kids chose school, Conway chose the streets. By adulthood, he had joined the New Mexican Mafia, a faction connected to but independent from California's La M. Within the gang, Conway was the model soldier, silent, loyal, ready to follow orders. By the early 2000s, he was involved in large drug operations. Federal records show that in 2005, he was sentenced to 11 years for conspiring to distribute cocaine. But his record grew darker. In 2002, in a state case out of Arizona, he was convicted of homicide in the death of Carlos Garcia and sentenced to life without parole. With both state and federal sentences stacked, he was already destined never to leave prison. But the incident at Canaan drove him even deeper into infamy. On February 25, 2013, Conwy crossed paths with Officer Eric Williams in a prison hallway. What followed shook the federal system. Cameras recorded everything, leaving no doubt. At trial, his defense attorney admitted, "There's no question Jessie committed the homicide." The only question left was whether he would face death or another life sentence. In 2017, his trial unfolded in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The victim's family sat in the front row, listening to each detail. Security footage was shown to the jury, impossible to dispute. Conwy lowered his head and said, "I wish I could take back what I did, but I cannot." It was not an excuse, but a plea for his life. During sentencing, the jury split. 11 favored the death penalty, but 1 refused. The outcome? Life without parole. That deadlock sparked more than a verdict. It fueled political debate. Lawmakers proposed Eric's Law, which would allow a second jury if the first could not reach a unanimous decision on capital punishment. As a result, Conwy's name became tied not only to prison records but also to American legal history, symbolizing a gap in the sentencing system. After the trial, Conwy was sent to ADX Florence in Colorado, the prison known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In truth, he had already been placed there in 2013, immediately after the attack, to cut off any possibility of further communication or influence. Inside a 6-by-9-foot cell, under cold fluorescent lights 23 hours a day, he lives in near total silence. His single hour outside is spent in a narrow concrete yard, a steel cage covering the sky. No gang, no network, just one man aging in absolute isolation. For the correctional community, the death of Officer Eric Williams is a painful reminder that their profession balances daily on the edge of life and death. For the victim's family, Conwy's life sentence was delayed justice. And for him, ADX Florence became the graveyard of all ambition and every gang title. The name, Chino, is no longer a symbol of the streets or the Arizona prison yards. It is now only a shadow, buried on the roster of men condemned to live out their final days in Supermax silence.